guest host, I guess, for today. It's glad to be here. I've had hosted in the past, and it's good to be back to host Dr. Augustine Obour this afternoon. And if you could advance the slide, Anne. For the newcomers, the Soil Health Nexus is a group of university-led staff dedicated to increasing knowledge of soil health, extension-based resources. And our team includes university representatives from the 12 North Central region states. If you could advance it again, so we can talk about our format for today. What we're going to do is we're going to have a presentation for about a half hour with Q&A, and then we'll go into breakout rooms. You'll have an opportunity to get into a breakout room of your choice. You can join the researchers, educators, agency folks, farmers, and students. And what we'll do in that room, if you could advance the slide, what we'll do is talk about the topic, your thoughts and observations and those types of things. And you can stay on as long as you'd like and continue the conversation today. So with that, I'm going to welcome Augustine Obour. He's Associate Professor of Soil Science. And we're glad to have him to talk about, cover crop soil health and grazing. So with that, I'd like to welcome Augustine, and you can, if Anne could stop sharing, and you can share your slides and we can get underway. So welcome.
All right, let's see if I can share my slides here. So can you see my slides?
Yes, we can. Very nice, thanks.
They are uploading, I think. I have a few more to download. Yeah, so like you said, my name is Augustine Obour, soil scientist with Kansas State University. I'm based at the Agricultural Research Center in Hayes, which is about an hour, 15 minutes drive from Manhattan, which is in the western part of the state. So I'm happy today to share some of the work that we've been doing, looking at grazing cover crops and how that affects soil health. So if you are familiar with our environment in Western Kansas, it's similar to most of the semi-arid Great Plains. So most of our production systems are dryland crop production system. So our base crop will be winter wheat. So because we are dry, production here is highly dependent on water. So water that is stored during fallow, and also precipitation over the growing season. So our production systems dominantly will have some fallow periods. So if you see the pie charts that I put on here, so we still have people doing wheat fallow in areas that are very, very dry. So winter wheat is planted in October and then harvested in June. And then you have a long fallow period after wheat. Then you plant wheat again. Or in areas where we have a intensified production system, we have wheat sorghum fallow or wheat corn fallow production system. Fallow, even though it's not good for soil perspective, but it still helps in stabilizing crop yields because it stores water. The precipitation storage efficiency for fallow is not that very efficient. Depending on the tillage practice that you have during fallow, if you have no-till and you are able to manage all the weeds, you can store about 35%. But if you are tilling frequently, the storage efficiency that we've been measuring is about 20–25%. So tillage that is used to manage these weeds during fallow periods in the production system actually decreases the amount of residue cover, and that exposes our soils to erosion. Even in no-till, long-term no-till fields, we have seen these fields blow sometimes when we have successive droughts like we've been having since 2021. The no-till fields if we don't have water, it doesn't produce that much and you don't have much cover. So we have these soils blow because the wind blows all the time around here. So how do we protect the soil? we can grow cover crops. Cover crops have several benefits in terms of soil protection, provide residue, live plant to protect the soil against wind. It can increase soil organic matter content. Most recently, we've been seeing herbicide-resistant weeds in our production system. So having a cover crop in there can suppress these weeds. And these cover crops can also provide forage resources to farmers, especially this year when it's dry. If you have a cover crop like oat that pick up after we just a little bit of rain, you could use this as a forage. So despite all these benefits, cover crop uses water in our environment, and oftentimes we see cover crops as an impact on the subsequent crop yields, particularly wheat. So looking at the figures here, the first one is some of the data that we have in our long-term cover crop study in Garden City. This is 2012 winter wheat yields following a cover crop that was planted in 2011. You can see the far right bar is the chem fallow. We saw a significant yield decrease in winter wheat yields compared to the fallow. And then in 2009, where it was a very good year, we have about 80 bushels per acre wheat yields. In that scenario, growing a cover crop had no impact on the subsequent crop yield. So the thing is, the conundrum now is, how do we get all the benefits of cover crops, increasing soil cover, increase our organic matter content, and not have an impact on the profitability of the production system? So one thing that we are looking at is if you use the cover crop for forage, because most of these are annual crops, the species that we grow as cover crop are annual forages, essentially. So if you use it as a forage resource, then you get economic benefit from the cover crop immediately. If your yields are reduced, you can get an immediate economic benefit. But if you do that, then the drawback will be you are reducing the residue cover, because we need the residue to protect the soil against wind erosion. And then grazing can also result in compaction in a crop field. And we can also have a negative effect on soil organic matter content. So in our research since 2015, we are looking at, hey, if we want to use this as cover crop, then how much productivity can you get from these cover crops? And then if you graze it, what will be the impact on soil health and also crop yields and some of the ecosystem benefits? And then we are also doing this research on farm. Instead of doing it on the university small plots, we are also looking at on-farm study on the production scale. So this figure here shows where we have all these research. So we collaborating with over, right now we have about 15 sites across Kansas, but I'll not share all the data from this sites. I'll share data from about 3 of the production fields. And we also have our own experiments at Garden City and also around Cedar Bluff. But we have sites all the way from areas that have about 26 to 28 inches of precipitation to the southwest corner in Tribune, and then also in Higginton that has about 16 to 18 inches. So we are capturing all the precipitation gradient across the state. So how are we fitting cover crops into our production system? So our production system is mainly wheat corn fallow, or we are looking at wheat corn fallow or wheat sorghum fallow rotation. So we can plant a cool season cover crop right after in the spring into wheat stubble or corn stubble. Then we terminate the cover crop by June, and then we can grow winter wheat again in the fall. And then after wheat harvest, then we wait, we have another fallow period, or you can grow another cover crop and then plant grain sorghum. Or you can grow a fall planted cover crop. You graze the cover crop or you hay it, and then you plant grain sorghum. Or you can plant a summer cover crop right after wheat harvest in July. And then this type of cover crops may be frost killed, and then the following year you plant grain sorghum. So this is how we are looking at how to fit the cover crop into our system. So essentially, if you have a fallow period in the rotation, you can fit a cover crop in there. So this is the layout for our own research at the experiment station on small plots. These are about 60 by 100 feet, 60 feet wide by 100 feet long plots. So here we are doing this in a wheat sorghum fallow rotation. All the phases of the wheat sorghum fallow are present in the study. We have 5 treatments. We have chem fallow, no-till chem fallow, a standing cover crop, that is a true cover crop, or a cover crop that is utilized as forage. So we hay the cover crop, we graze the cover crop, or we have what we call a flex cover crop treatment. The flex cover crop treatment is implemented in, so during March, when we go to plant the spring cover crops, if it's dry and the soil water content is very low, then we don't plant the cover crop, we leave it as fallow. If it is, we have moist soil in there, if it's, and then it's going to be wet over the growing season, then we go ahead and plant the cover crop. Our hay cover crop treatment, we are haying it about 6 inches high, purposely to leave enough residue. And then we grazing these cover crops at the time when the grass species in the mix has headed, because these are small plots, so we need enough biomass to graze it. So this on the right, you will see a couple of pictures. So we have a we lay out panels to, we just essentially what we do is we fence off the treatments that we are going to graze. So we use these panels to fence the plot out, and we put the cattle in there to graze the plots. So the average stocking rate is about 1,300 pound live weight per acre for this street. So these are small plots, and we are not looking at, because they are small plots, we are not looking at animal gains. So we are only looking at the grazing impact on soil health. So these are some data that we collected from the study since 2015 to 2022. So the blue bars are the standing cover crop biomass. The red bars are the pre-grazing biomass. The green bars are the post-grazing residue that we measured. And the purple bar is the hay cover crop treatment. So what we're doing here is we go in and we measure the cover crop biomass before we graze the cover crop. And then after grazing, we also measure the post-graze biomass. So what we're seeing is we have significant variability in the production. In 2015, for instance, we have close to 5,000 pounds. But then in 2020 and 2021, we have about 2,000 pounds per acre. So this high variability, if you want to use this as forage, then you have to be cognizant of the fact that you are going to have a decrease in production. It's not going to be the same every year. It's going to vary. Some years you may have high biomass, some years there may be low productivity. So you have to adjust your stocking rate based on that. However, what is interesting is that if you look at the red bar and then the green bar, on average, we are taking about 40% of the cover crop biomass through grazing. So when we grazing the cover crop, we are taking about 40% of it. And then when we hay it, we are taking about 75% compared to the non-graze cover crop. So if we remove it about 40 to 50%, then we have significant residue cover from grazing the cover crop that can protect the soil. Then the other thing that we also look at is to see if grazing the cover crop will still have any effect on the weed suppression benefits. So this is data from 2022 HB Ranch. That is where this experiment is located. And here we are seeing that cover crop biomass, presence of cover crop biomass significantly reduced weed biomass, about 2 to 4 times compared to the chem fallow. See, the chem fallow treatment, these measurements were taken in June. At that point, the chem fallow treatment has had 2 herbicide applications. So by growing this cover crop, we are saving 2 herbicides application timings. And then one thing that I also want to point out is that the standing cover crop treatments compared to where we graze or we hay the cover crop is significantly different. Because when we graze the cover crop, we saw that the cattle were able to pick some of the weeds below the cover crop canopy. But the standing cover crop, you still have weeds below the canopy, but they are very small. They are not huge. That is why it's significantly smaller than the chem fallow treatment. So these cover crops, when we graze it or we hay it, we are still able to get a benefit for weed suppression, and it's even better than the standing cover crop. Then the most important thing is what is the impact of grazing or haying this cover crop on the subsequent cash crop yield, which is winter wheat, which is directly coming after the cover crop. So this is data that we collected since 2016. The dark bars are the chem fallow treatment. The purple bar is the true cover crop, that is the standing cover crop. The gray bar, the dark gray bar is where we graze the cover crop. The light bar is where we hay the cover crop. And the light purple bars represent the flesh hayed cover crop treatment. So in 2016, when we planted a cover crop in 2015, it did not have any impact on the subsequent winter wheat crop yield in 2016. However, 2017, 2018, growing a cover crop in the prior year had a significant negative effect on the subsequent crop yield. Interestingly, in 2021 and 2022, growing a cover crop had no effect. Actually, we saw an increase in crop yields with a cover crop treatment in 2021. That was very interesting to us. And I think it's because we caught some rain in the spring at the right time, and the cover crop treatments normally increase water infiltration that we've measured that. So I will show that later on. But that is what I think is causing, it caused the increase in yields. That was 1 year, but that is kind of interesting. So on average, if you look at the yields over the 7 years, the chem fallow, which is the dark bar, the average yields about 5 bushels per acre more than the cover crop treatments. So if you're grazing the cover crop or using it as hay, the yields are about 5 on average from this plots is 5 bushels per acre less. So what this means is that if you are using this as a grazing resource, then you are going to make enough money, more money than having just kind of a chem fallow. So this is adding some resources to the system. You are reducing herbicide application twice, and you are also getting forage benefit from these. So this is some of the, I'll share some of the information from the on-farm study just from 3 sites, producer that we work with in Hayes, Alexander, and also in Marquette. On the on-farm study, we are looking at only 2 treatments, non-graze cover crops, and then a graze cover crop treatment. These cover crops were either planted in the spring, summer, or in the fall. And the summer cover crops were Sudan grass, German millet, sunflower, sunham, and radishes. The spring cover crops were oat, triticale, barley, radish, sunflower pea, and rapeseed. And then the winter cover crops were triticale, rapeseed, and radishes. So these fields were about 50 to 90 acres. This is one side here. This is Alexander, an 80-acre field. So what we did was, this was planted into corn stubble in April 2019. That was when we started. He planted it around the first week of April, and they started grazing it towards the end of May. We split this field into 4 different paddocks. And we have the bigger areas will be the grazing treatment, and then we have a smaller area, which will be the non-graze treatment. So we can compare. So we have 4 different replicas in each field. So these are some pictures from the Alexander field. So here, what we did was we were using just to prevent the cattle from grazing the non-graze area, we use an electric fence. So if you can see that on these pictures, we just have a polywire fence that separates the graze from the non-graze area. So after they finish grazing, we just move them to the next paddock and we fence the area that they are not supposed to graze off. And we did that all for the 4 reps. So it took about, the first year was about 31 days, and then the subsequent one, he grazed it for about 41 days. So, and like I said, this is old triticale barley sunflower radish mix. And then this is a picture from the summer cover crop in Hayes. These summer cover crops are amazing. So you look at the first picture was taken on June 28, and 1 month later, look at how big the plots are. The farmer is standing in here. When he put the cattle in there to graze in August, he couldn't see the cows out there. They were cow-calf pairs, and he was worried about it. But I was pleased with how much biomass we were producing because of the soil benefit from it. But the producer wanted something short that he could graze. But they went ahead and grazed it, and it was amazing to see how much growth we got out there. If you look at the picture, look at the canopy, that is very clean. There are no weeds out there. Those grasses provide significant cover and weed suppression. So these are some of the biomass data that we collected from the on-farm study. Here too, we collected pre-graze biomass and post-grazing biomass. So the ones that I've highlighted, let's look at that. So if you're looking at both, this is Alexander, both the spring cover crop and the summer cover crop in 2020. So when we started, we had about 1,300 pounds per acre before grazing. At the end of grazing, we have about 1,000 pounds. So statistically, they are not different. And then when you look at the summer cover crop that was planted right after wheat harvest on the same field, we started about 3,900 pounds per acre. And then after grazing, we have about 3,700 pounds per acre. If you look at Marquette, both from 2019 to 2021, there was no significant difference between the pre-grazing biomass and the post-grazing biomass. So what this means is that these spring cover crops or these cool season grasses, when you graze it and allow time between when you take the cattle off before you terminate, they can regrow. They have very good regrowth potential, and this can provide significant soil cover. Even you graze the cover crop, they graze it down and then it grew back. So like if you divide the field into paddocks like we did in Alexander, when you finish grazing, you move to the next field, then it grows back. Within 30 days, you have significant regrowth. And that's why we are not seeing any much difference between the pre-grazing biomass and the post-graze biomass after grazing. We also collected some data on animal performance, and what is significant here that I want to point out, if you look at the crude protein levels, it's between 19 to 26%, because these were grazed very young. So you have these annual forages growing at a very tender growth period, and they have a lot of protein. And then if you look at the number of grazing days, they range from 31 to 41 days of grazing. That's significant savings. And these producers that we were working with were very pleased with the number of savings that days that they can save not grazing their pastures. And then we also collected some animal gain data that shows that there was some gain in livestock waste with grazing these cover crops. So of course, we are interested in the soil properties. So one important thing that we are worried about is soil compaction. So we measure bulk density, penetration resistance. We also look at residue cover, soil organic carbon content, and aggregate stability from these fields. So this is residue cover picture that I took at Marquette in 2019. Look at the amount of residue after grazing and terminating the cover crop. This is really nice residue cover that the producer planted soybean into this field. So this is residue cover that we measured at HB Ranch in 2020. On the y-axis is residue cover percentage, and the x-axis is the cover crop treatments that I've mentioned before: chem fallow, standing cover crop, hay cover crop, and graze cover crop treatments. And as you can see, compared to chem fallow, the residue cover is over 80%, even though we graze the cover crop or we hay the cover crop. And it was significantly different from the chem fallow treatment. So now bulk density, soil compaction, as measured indicator of soil compaction. This is haze at the producer field. So here we are looking at 0 to 2 inch depth and 2 to 6 inch depth. The dark bar is the initial bulk density. The purple bar is the treatment that was grazed, and the gray bar is the non-grazed cover crop treatment. So in 2020, when we measured this in the top 2 inches, we did not see any difference between grazed or non-grazed cover crop treatment. In 2021, similarly, there was no difference. That would have been this field that had 2 cycles of cover crops, summer cover crop in 2019, and then spring cover crop in 2021. And as you can see here, the bulk density, even though it's not different between the cover crop treatments, it was significantly different from when we started. Growing the cover crop reduced soil bulk density near the soil surface. Similarly, when we measure this in 2 to 6 inch depth, we are still seeing the same thing. After 2 cycles of this cover crop treatment, we are seeing a significant decrease in bulk density compared to when we started. So this, I think, is attributed to, can be attributed to the sorghum Sudan grass that we started with in this study. We have about 7,000 pounds per acre production from these cover crops, and that Sudan grass can put on a lot of roots into the soil. So that is partly the reason why we're seeing these results. Then we also measured penetration resistance. This is looking at this in Alexander and also in Marquette, comparing grazed versus non-grazed cover crop treatment right after the cover crops, the cattle has been moved from the cover crop plots. And here we are not seeing any difference at either location in terms of penetration resistance. So penetration resistance measurements, if it's more than 2 megapascals, then the soil is be considered compacted. But here they are all less than 0.5. So for this particular study, we did not see any impact on penetration resistance. So we didn't see any significant compaction issues. Then we look at soil organic matter content. This is coming from the site in Hayes. The same kind of bars. We are looking at the 0 to 2 inches and 2 to 6. So we're comparing the initial levels and also our cover crop treatments. So we started around 1.4% organic matter, soil organic carbon, and we're able to increase this to close to about 2% soil organic carbon content. Our soils are a little bit different. 2% soil organic carbon is really good for our soils here. And then if you look at 2 to 6 inches, again, we are seeing the same thing. The cover crop treatments kind of increase soil organic carbon slightly more than when we started. Once again, there was no difference between the grazed and non-grazed cover crop treatments. This is the residue from this field. So this is after they have grazed the cover crops and moved the cattle out. You can look at the amount of residue out there. So with this kind of growth, I think that is why we saw an improvement in carbon and also a reduction in soil bulk density. So this is data from HB Ranch on our small plots study. This was measured in 2019 and 2020. On the y-axis, this is our soil organic carbon amounts, stocks in tons per acre, and then the x-axis is our fallow. standing cover crop, hay cover crop, and graze cover crop treatment. So when we measured these in one phase of the rotation in 2019, we saw about 11% increase in soil organic carbon content. So these plots have actually had 2 cycles of cover crops planted in this field. And then in 2020, even though we saw a numerical increase in soil organic carbon, it wasn't statistically different from the no-till chem fallow. So this is kind of things that we see in our system. Sometimes you measure an increase in organic carbon content versus fallow, but where we see a significant increase will be when we are comparing to a tillage system. This is no-till, so we are not. It's not surprising that we are not seeing very huge increases in soil organic carbon compared to the no-till fallow. Then this is aggregate stability data that we collected in 2019. Here on the y-axis is mean weight diameter, and then the x-axis is our cover crop treatment, hay, graze, and standing cover crop. And this, we've been seeing this consistently. We grow a cover crop, we are able to increase aggregate stability compared to the no-till fallow. And here too, the hay treatment, the standing cover crop, and graze cover crop treatment were not significantly different. So we can use these cover crops for forage and still get the same soil health benefit. And this is water infiltration data that we collected in 2018. On the same plots here, we are looking at fallow versus old triticale treatment that we graze, or old triticale non-graze, and a cocktail mixture of 6 species cover crops. This data was collected about 11 months after the cover crops had been terminated. So the cover crops were planted in 2017, and they were terminated, planted in March and terminated in June. And this was measured in May 2018. We're still picking up increases in soil water infiltration compared to the fallow treatment. So the other thing that we are also looking at is our flex cover crop treatment. This is something that we are looking at in our environment. So if it's very dry, then we don't plant the cover crop. So if we have enough moisture, we go ahead and plant the cover crop. So if we do this, do we get soil health benefit? So this is just soil physical properties in the top 2 inches and 2 to 6 inches. So the flex cover crop treatment is the last bar. And as you can see, aggregate stability is significantly greater than the fallow treatment. The same thing, 2 to 6 inches, we are seeing an increase in aggregate stability compared to the fallow treatment. So what this means is we can still do infrequent cover cropping in our system and still get some soil health benefits. So in conclusion, we can plant these cover crops in our environment. They are productive, but the yields vary from year to year. Grazing cover crop in our study did not have any negative effect on soil bulk density or penetration resistance that we measured. But we were removing about 40 to 50% of the cover crop residue. So this is something, if you graze everything now and you don't have any regrowth, your results may be different. So right now we started a study this year to look at how much can you remove without having any negative effects. So we started that study this year looking at 50% removal, 75% and 95%, essentially grazing out. So we started it this year. It was very dry, so we couldn't implement one site, but we have a producer that we're working with. He caught some good rain, so we are able to do that grazing on that farm. So soil organic matter content increased with cover crop management strategies where we graze it or we hay it, or left it at a true cover crop. We're able to increase soil organic matter content. And aggregate stability consistently increased compared to chem fallow, and even where we have infrequent cover cropping, that is the flex cover cropping treatment. And then grazing or haying cover crops provide a similar benefit as when we left it as a true cover crop. So We can graze it, get economic benefit, and if we can get the same soil health benefit, then that is a great thing. But the caveat is residue management is very important. You have to make sure you are not removing all the residue or grazing everything so you can have enough soil cover to protect the soil. One thing that we have seen consistently in our studies, though, is the cover crop mixes that we have. You have to have some productive grasses in there if you want to use it as a forage resource, so you can get more forage and also regrowth. If you graze it, these cool season grasses in the mixture will grow back up to provide the residue cover that you need. Grain crop yields, we've seen some years we have similar yields as the chem fallow, and some years we have decrease in yields with the cover crop. So what we recommend in our water limited environment for cover crops to work so far is utilizing the cover crop for forage to get some economic benefit. And our results also, at least for the short term, shows that you can get improvement in soil health. And then if you can get some economic benefit from it, then that is a win-win situation. So that is all I have for today. And this is my contact information. I will stop here and take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Augustine. At this time, there's nothing in the chat as far as questions. So I'd invite participants to put questions in the chat if you have them. One of the questions that I might have is, how did you determine the stocking rates? Were you looking at a mop type grazing system or fairly intense, or how did you make that determination?
So the question is, how do we determine the stocking rate? So like I said, we take pre-grazing biomass. So 1 week before we plan to graze this cover crop, we do go there, take the cover crop biomass, determine how much forage we have, and then we stock it we are doing mob grazing, essentially is what we are doing, but we targeting to remove about 40 to 50%. So we determine the biomass and then we stock it based on that.
Okay, thank you. There's a question come in. What do you usually say to producers who are worried about that year-to-year variation?
Yeah, thank you. That is a very important question. So what we recommend is because of that, and it's not only for cover crop. Our wheat, our sorghum yields, everything is the same in semi-arid environment. So if you want to do this, have a backup plan. Have like you have a pasture around, or have some other forage resource, because it's going to happen. 1 year you may have tons of forage, and then the another year it may not work very well. So that is why you may want to. So we also recommend that planting, if you have these grasses in there, we grow both triticale and oat in our mix, because some years the triticale does very well. Like this year, the oats are doing way better. You can't even notice the triticale out there in the mixture, but the oats are doing very well. So that is something that you want to play around with, but having a backup plan is definitely what you need to do.
Thank you. There's another question. What were the cover crop mixes that were used? Was there any variation on impacts?
Okay, so that is the cover crop mixes. So we have done these studies since 2007. We started planting different cover crop mixes, and then we found that oat and triticale, a mixture with oat and triticale, we don't have to have too much in there. So a three-way mix will be great. So we are doing oat triticale P mix for our grazing study. But we do have experiments where we have 6 species mixes, 4 species, single species, and then we finally settle on, because our oat triticale P or oat triticale alone, we're producing about 3,000 pounds per acre based on the previous experiment. So that is what we are using. And then the on-farm study, though, we are using a maximum of 6 species. So the spring cover crops were oat, triticale, pea, rapeseed, sunflowers, and then I think there was pea in it. So we have 3 species of grasses and then 3 of broadleaves for the on-farm study. And then the summer cover crop also had, I think, also 6 species, but it was, we have Sudan grass and millet, and then the other species were rapeseed, sunflowers. I've forgotten the last one, but I think there were five species in there.
Okay, there's another question. Is there a way to quantify the increased water retentions, pounds per acre, more water infiltrating per acre when using cover crops?
Well, we have done some infiltration measurements, but we haven't, it's kind of, infiltration is a tough deal to measure. It's so highly variable. The data that I showed, we did that with the help of NRCS. We spent like a whole week doing that because we have 5, we didn't even do it on all 10 treatments. We did only 4 treatments and we spent 3 days and we were doing only even 1 per plot. To get an accurate data of infiltration, you need to measure a minimum of 3 measurements per plot. So that is a tough deal to see if you can see an increase in water infiltrating with cover crops. Sometimes we do see an increase, sometimes we don't. We can measure it, but it's kind of a whole lot of work.
Okay, thank you. Scott has a question. Did you collect any biological activity measurements in your testing?
Yeah, thank you. Did you collect biological activity? We haven't done that in our this particular study, but we did one on our long-term study. That was not grazing, that was haying the cover crop. We did it after 10 years of the cover crop, and we saw an increase in biological properties, total microbial biomass, fungal activity were higher with the cover crop, whether we grazed, whether we hay it or we left it as a true cover crop. Yeah, we saw an increase, but we haven't done it for this particular study. That is something that we need to do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There's no other questions in the chat, so I think we'll have an opportunity. Well, there was just one popped in. Is there any NRCS or other program that which incentivizes cover crops?
Yeah, is there any
Over
program? Yes, there are programs that incentivize producers to grow cover crops versus chem fallow. NRCS is doing that already. They're providing some money for growing cover crops.
Another one, what are the dollar gains from grazing versus decrease in bushels?
Yes, so this is a good question. We did we have published that data, some economics on this, and I don't remember the exact figure. I don't want to quote me on that. I should have added that slide to this, but it was too much data, so I couldn't put it all together. But the cover crops, when we did not use it as forage, was a kind of the returns were negative compared to chem fallow, even though we have the cover crop reducing the number of herbicide application, 2 herbicide spray applications. But when we use it at forage, then we are gaining about a range, depending on the year, we're getting about $200 to about $400 per acre. But that was just, we did not include insurance, and then we did not include the renting of the land and all. We just base it on the data that we have. So yes, we saw a gain. It's way better than even the decrease in yields when you use it for forage. But if you just grow it as a true cover crop, you still have the benefit of reducing herbicide application, but the cost involved in the herbicide and sort of cover crop seed, and also you also have a decrease in yield. So when you combine the cost of the seed and then the decreasing yields with the cover crop, then the true cover crop doesn't pencil out. But if you use it as a forage resource, then depending on the year, you are making about $200 to $400 per acre based on the calculation that we did.
Okay, good. Another
Now,
question.
I have that paper. If you need it, I can send it to you. Send me an email. I can send you that publication.
Okay, very good, Augustine. There's another question came is crop insurance coverage affected by the use of cover crop, or is it considered best management practice?
Yeah, that crop insurance was a big issue a couple of years ago, but I think now it's no longer a big issue. I may stand to be corrected, but I think now there is a federal incentive for if you plant a cover crop, it's regarded as a good management practices, and you can get a discount for crop insurance. I think that is now part of the insurance program. But previously, if you have a cover crop, at least replacing fallow, which means that your yields are going to be reduced, and then your crops has to be insured as a continuous crop. Yeah.
Okay, there's no other questions. I think we could either end it because we're so close to the end. So I think that's what we'll probably do. So thank you, Augustine, for the information. It was wonderful and interesting. And again, you can, if anybody wants to follow up with him, his contact information is on the slide on your screen. This will also be posted at the Soil Health Nexus website if you want to go review the information. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Please join us next month. I believe it's July 19th. Same time, and stay tuned for the topic and the presenter. So with that, thank you again, Augustine, and thanks everyone for joining us, and have a good day.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.